Hey everybody, Chuck Melindy with Disruptive Dialogue coming to you from North Carolina. This is a little bit of a different spin on what I've been doing lately. As you can appreciate, I record these podcasts, but a lot has been going on with President Trump and looking at prices outside of the United States, reference pricing, drug importation, you name it, trying to address high drug prices in our country, which is badly needed. As you know, last week was the first of these two episodes on high drug pricing. And if you watched that show, what you saw was that the system, it's messed up. I mean, the drug manufacturers, they set list prices quite often very, very high. And how they come up with that, and I used to work for one, I really don't know. They do look at, are there other things in the marketplace that meet that medical need at this time? Is there additional value that this medicine brings? What was the R&D cost involved? All of those things are part of the drug price ingredients that come up with the final list price. What they're also having to consider these days is the Inflation Reduction Act. With that, drugs, high-cost drugs, basically are going to get around 11 to 13 years life before Medicare can choose them to negotiate. Usually that patent's around 17 years, so drug manufacturers have to look at that. They also have to look at, okay, is there a lot of competition? So all these things come into play. And quite honestly, who cares? You need to be able to afford your drugs. The challenge is that the manufacturers, whatever their list price is then negotiated with health insurance companies, PBMs, and hospitals, as we've already spoken about, as well as physician practices who give drugs in their own office. And then that price is passed on to the consumer via their higher premiums, co-insurance, or co-pay. That is determined by the hospital, by the Medicare program, by the PBMs or the insurers. But I really focused on those middlemen last time. We do need to focus on drug manufacturers as well. So I did already tell you that all these things go into place. You already know, if you listen to past podcasts, that these manufacturers do not make as much money as the health insurers, some of the suppliers, even the hospitals are getting gigantic. But at the end of the day, the starting price starts with manufacturers. There's a couple things that they need to do better. Number one, we need more transparency as far as where do they come up with these costs. Some is out there. There are some great transparency reports. Johnson & Johnson, Merck, Pfizer, a number of them have some really good transparency reports. If you ever get a chance, you should look at it. Second thing that they need to do is around patent thickets. And what I mean by that is the government allows pharmaceutical companies to have a certain number of years where they do not have to let a generic or a copycat drug come onto the marketplace so that they can get their R&D back. However, manufacturers do have ways to get around that. So say, for example, a normal patent is 17 years, so you can't bring a generic on before 17 years after FDA approval. If a manufacturer comes out with a new indication, like a pediatric indication that wasn't there initially, they can get an additional 6 months. Well, different things like that can extend a patent life. Two examples, and look, like I say, don't hate the player, hate the game. Humira, which was the most successful drug ever in the United States and the world, basically they extended their patent life. I think they were approved in 1998. They just came off their patent in 2023 or 2022. Now, if you just said, okay, 17 years, that'd have been like 2015. Additional 8 or 9 years added to that. Amgen has a drug called Embro. They also came out in 1998. That drug still isn't off patent until 2027. They've applied for hundreds and hundreds of patents. That needs to be fixed. Generics need to be able to come onto the market, and we need to be able to compete. I had a colleague tell me the other day that I think was a great idea is, look, I'm not a big fan of direct-to-consumer advertising when it comes to branded drugs. But if you're going to do that, maybe we need to start to say, that's fine, but you need to put on your commercial. What is the list price? Now, they will push back and say, well, the list price isn't what the market plays after negotiations. Well, then maybe the government needs to say, you know what? We're going to start to pull the curtain back, and we want to know what your discount price is to the insurers or the hospitals or the PBMs. And these players just need to say, you know what? This is an epidemic of price hurting patients, hurting our economy and our businesses. We need more transparency. It is what it is. No and, ifs, or buts. That's up to the legislators. So real quick, I'm going to talk about the impact of high prices. Last year, 3 in 10 Americans, 30% of Americans, either declined to fill a prescription, or they skipped a dose, or they rationed their pills because of cost. This non-adherence to these medications added up last year to about 125,000 deaths. So 125,000 deaths annually because they're not taking their prescriptions as prescribed due to cost. This cost the healthcare system, according to the study, over $300 billion every year. So we're worried about the weight loss drugs are going to cost the government $5 or $6 billion a year. The high cost of drugs, patients not adherent, is costing our country up to $300 billion a year. So as we all know, President Trump just came out with an executive order, something that he promised on the campaign trail, something that has been needed for a while. The Biden administration, and we're going to talk about the law they passed with the Inflation Reduction Act a couple of years ago and the impact that is having. But let's talk about this effort that Donald Trump is trying to do to reduce drug prices. First off, he's coming out and saying, look, we want to do what they can call it most favored nation status or the international reference pricing. But at the end of the day, the drug systems in other countries are much different than they are in the United States. They do not have all these drug supply chain intermediaries, the insurers, PBMs, hospitals, GPOs, you name it, negotiating with manufacturers. These countries, these other countries outside the U.S., they negotiate directly with drug manufacturers. They get their price, and then that price is what their citizens pay. The Republican Party has always stayed away, and a lot of the Democratic Party, from price controls. The Inflation Reduction Act that Biden passed, they call it Medicare negotiation. It is not a negotiation. It is price controls. The manufacturers don't have any choice, to be quite honest with you. They're going to have to accept what the government says is going to be the price. So can we import drug prices from outside other countries? I don't think we can, and I don't think manufacturers are going to allow this to happen. They are not going to keep prices artificially low in Europe, Japan, and other places so that their prices in the U.S. go down. If anything, what you will probably see is manufacturers are just going to have to tell European countries and others, hey, you're going to have to pay higher prices, because if our prices in the U.S. are going to be based on prices outside the U.S., then we're going to raise the prices outside the U.S. because the U.S. is the biggest market out there. One thing to remember, though, these European countries, there is a cost to having lower prices. Quite often, if a new drug comes to market, that new drug is usually not introduced in the OUS till 9 months, 12 months, maybe 2 years after the U.S. Sometimes, especially in European, Eastern European countries, and they're paying even lower prices than some of these wealthier European countries, they may not even get certain drugs brought into their prices. Now, that being said, we do need to look at how they are negotiating prices over there compared to the U.S. With the Inflation Reduction Act, basically all that the administration did was have the pharmaceutical companies come in with their studies, try to prove the value of their drug, and then they would come up with a price. And the manufacturers had to accept that price or they're going to get kicked out of the Medicare program and Medicaid program, and they're not going to let that happen. One thing that I do believe is really interesting is that we're going to wait for 11 to 13 years to negotiate prices with Medicare, and I think that was a very good thing for manufacturers, because we don't want to lose research and development. We don't want to lose innovation. Some of these other countries outside the U.S., they negotiate as soon as the drug comes to market, and maybe manufacturers shouldn't do that. The other thing I think is key and that the U.S. needs to look at when negotiating is, does a new medicine bring something new of value to the market? Is it a copycat drug? I mean, a lot of times these drugs will come out and there's already 2 or 3 competitive drugs out there. Well, if you're not bringing anything to market that's new, should you be able to charge a higher price? I don't know. Now, I will say that it's hard for manufacturers because it usually takes anywhere from 5 to 10 to 15 years to bring a drug to market. It's hard to guess what will be on the market at that time. So, one thing to look at is, hey, if you're not bringing anything special to the market, we do want you to recoup your R&D investments. We don't want to downplay the chances to innovate, or disincentivize that. So you can charge whatever's out there right now, but to charge more, you're going to have to show additional value. I apologize to my old industry, but that is something I think that we need to continue to look at. Look, at the end of the day, it is true that the U.S. taxpayer pays more. Studies have shown that U.S. taxpayers pay 4 times more than most developed countries for their brand name drugs. Now, I used to be in the negotiating business. Let me tell you, we are cutting off 30, 40, 50, 60% the cost of the drugs the manufacturers are during these negotiations with insurers, PBMs, and hospitals. But that being said, even after you take out the discounts and the rebates and the fees, Americans are still paying 2 to 3 times more. So the choice is lower the prices in America or increase the prices in Europe, or maybe lower the prices in America a little bit and increase the prices in Europe a little bit more. I can tell you right now, we're not going to keep the prices of drugs going to Greece or Slovenia and lose a ton of profit over in America. So those countries, they're about to more than likely get hit pretty big with new price increases. So another strategy or solution for lower drug prices that's being talked about is drug importation. Now, a number of states have already passed drug importation, one of those being Florida. I was part of that when that was all happening. I was involved with my lobbyists, and we're trying to figure all that out. Look, it sounds easier than it actually is. One reason why drug prices are so high in America, and no one talks about this, is the regulatory process. The regulatory process is unbelievably complicated in the United States. The big reason for that is we all want to make sure that our drugs are safe, are effective, are not counterfeit. And to do that, especially in today's age of all these technologies that can cause counterfeits, etc., and fool people, we need a system that ensures the safety of our medicine supply. When you start to bring in drugs from other countries, that starts to shake at the core that safety net, because they can label things a certain way. There can be different things, different ingredients put into the drug that is sent to America. A long time, I want to say Dr. Reddy was one of the books I read about, where India, the manufacturing facilities were not up to par. And then the American inspectors would go over there like once every 2 or 3 years, and they'd fix it or they move all the files away. It is really crazy, shady things that can happen outside the U.S. So when we start to go, let's just import drugs from the U.S., it's not that easy. The Health and Human Secretary, HHS, so currently it's Kennedy. But prior to Kennedy, the first 6 times that legislation was made around drug importation, the secretary of the HHS secretary basically was like, no, I can't assure that the quality of the drugs, the safety of the drugs outside the U.S. system are going to work. The latest HHS secretary did approve that drugs get imported, but then again, it's still not that easy. So when Florida said, you know what, we're going to import drugs from Canada, sounds great. Well, the Canadian officials were like, wait a minute, we're 40 million people here in Canada. Just the state of Florida has 22 million people. We already have some drug shortages here. We cannot supply the state of Florida, much less any other state, their drug supply when we are barely being able to get it to our own countrymen. So they actually passed laws and rules that prevented the exportation of drugs to the U.S. And I can tell you right now, if you think the drug manufacturers are going to sit back and go, oh, wait a minute, our drug sales to Canada just tripled, and now we're seeing drugs being imported from Canada to different states, the manufacturers are going to balk at that and probably start to charge Canada more. So it is much more complicated than it seems. Just realize that there is the safety issue, There is the regulatory issue. There are the supply issues from other countries. And there's the manufacturers and how they're going to respond. We're still in a capitalist society, and they're not just going to turn over and say it's okay. So real quick, I talked about the Inflation Reduction Act, and I do believe that there were some good things that were put in there. I think the Medicare negotiation of drugs, it's incredibly flawed. Once again, we talk about unintended consequences of good intentional laws. So next year, 2026 is when people may see the effects of these drug price negotiations. But what basically happened is there was a list of 10 drugs that the administration looked at and said, these are high cost drugs in Medicare. We're going to negotiate them down. They brought the manufacturers in and they negotiated down, and they have published what these drug prices are for these expensive drugs. That being said, there's very few guardrails out there for the health insurance companies. The health insurance companies, at the end of the day, even though these are Medicare drugs, the health insurance companies, they run Medicare Part D, where these negotiated drugs will go through. So bottom line is, what we are already seeing and hearing, and when I say we, I'm talking studies, independent studies, different policy wonks, is that the insurers have already said that some of these negotiated drugs will not be preferred on their formularies. So in other words, say Stelara, which is an arthritis drug or psoriasis drug, was negotiated. Basically, a physician goes to write a prescription for a Medicare Part D patient, and they say, you know what, for psoriasis, I'm going to put him on Stelara. Well, the insurance company could say, you know what, these negotiated drugs, I don't get any rebates or discounts from the manufacturer, so I'm not going to make any money. I'm not going to let that be a first-line drug. So the drug's been negotiated down, the price is lower, the doctor asks for the drug, but the insurer says, nope, I don't make enough. You're going to use one of the other drugs that was not negotiated by the government, and I'm going to get my rebate. So that is one issue that you need to realize. At the end of the day, patients may not even get the negotiated drugs that was negotiated by our government through the Inflation Reduction Act, because the insurer's not going to make any money on it. And there's no guardrails to prevent them from doing that. Another thing that we're starting to hear is that for those negotiated drugs, if a patient is going to go on it, we are hearing that insurers are going to increase the co-insurance for those patients, the copay for those type of drugs. Because if they're not going to get it through rebates and discounts from the manufacturer, well, then they're going to get it from the patient. And lastly, they're going to increase premiums. I already said on a previous podcast that the Inflation Reduction Act, we've already seen for Part D patients, not for your MA, your Medicare Advantage Part D patients, but for your prescription drug patients, those in traditional Medicare, their premiums went up over 40% for this year. So that is something that needs to be addressed. If we're going to negotiate the government with our manufacturers, there need to be guardrails put on the gatekeepers to drugs, which are the PBMs and the insurers. Now, I will say, looking at my notes real quick, one good aspect is the cap on Medicare Part D beneficiaries out-of-pocket max. Bottom line is, starting in 2025, outside of patients' premiums, which for the Part D patients, the PDP patients, those premiums went up, their out-of-pocket can't be more than $2,000. And if you're out there and you don't know this, you can also appeal to the insurance company who runs your Part D plan that you want those monthly payments, your out-of-pocket, that $2,000, you want it spread out over the months of that year that are remaining. So if you get a prescription in January, you want to have that cost. If it's a $5,000 cost, well, guess what? Now it's capped at $2,000, and that $2,000 can be divided by 12, so it's spread out over 12 months. And I think that's a really good thing. So one of the things that I also want to talk about is who gets value from the drug and who should pay for it. We have around drug prices right now, we have these weight loss drugs that are out there, Wegovy and I forget the name of the other one. But bottom line is Lilly, Novo Nordisk, and a few others have weight loss drugs. There are studies out there that show the benefits of patients losing weight due to these drugs. There was a Taiwanese researchers 5-year study, 24,000 participants. showed that non-diabetic but obese subjects found not only significant reductions in heart disease, hypertension, stroke, and kidney failure, but also mortality. So you're talking, we know this is going to help. We know we have an epidemic of obesity in our country. I was looking at some crazy numbers. In 1960, 13% of adults were obese in our country. 0.9% were severely obese. In 2017, it went from 13% of adults being obese to, in 2017, 43% of adults. We have an obesity epidemic in our country. We need these drugs. So here's the problem for employers and insurers. You can be working at an employer, get on an obesity drug, lose all this weight, and now the employer, you would like to think their health care costs for you would go down. But what if you leave that employer and go somewhere else? Well, that employer just paid a ton of money for you to be on this drug, and now you left, and they don't benefit from that. Same with insurance companies. And insurers basically going to say, look, the average person stays with an insurance plan every 2 to 3 years, they'll switch. So they're only going to get a couple years benefit. So if they're going to pay out a ton, and they ran across this situation with the Hep C drugs that came out, 8-10 years ago, they're like, oh my God, I'm going to pay all this money. And yes, this will save me money down the road for these patients because they're not going to have hepatitis C anymore. But I'm going to lose that patient. So the next insurance company benefits from the cost that I paid. So same with these weight loss drugs. So how I look at this is two things. I think the patients have to have some responsibility. I'm not talking about cost. I'm talking about lifestyle changes. So maybe with these obesity drugs, we will pay for you to do this. But if you do not do different things to change your lifestyle that warrant an investment in you to lose weight through a drug, you're going to have to pay some of that money back. Another thing that I think that as a country we need to start to consider is who benefits from it. Well, an insurance company is not going to benefit from it because that patient could leave. An employer, same thing, they could leave. We have an obesity epidemic in our country. This is something that is going to benefit our entire country. I think there are certain drugs that if it's going to make an impact on the cost of healthcare in our country and impact all of our society, that is maybe a place where the government comes in and subsidizes these type of drugs. So look, I'm going to wrap this up. I really wanted to just come to you quickly, and instead of this being 4 or 5 weeks down the road, my daughter, who's amazing, is recording it and she's going to edit it. I wanted this to be part 2 of the Drug Price Podcast. Last week was the first one. As I told you last time, only 15 cents of every dollar is spent on drugs. So yes, it's a significant piece. Patients feel the pain, employers are feeling the pain, but there needs to be more drug price transparency. Our drug price system is screwed up. This whole rebate and discounts that insurers and PBMs and hospitals are getting from manufacturers and quite often usually are not passing them on, these savings, that needs to change. So we can try and benchmark our prices to countries outside the US. We can try and import drugs from countries outside the US and have a little bit more uncertainty as far as the safety of our drug supply. We could reduce some of the regulations in our country if we're willing to do that to lower the burden on manufacturers. A real quick tangent, Johnson & Johnson launched a cell and gene therapy. It was super expensive, and it was amazing the benefits that came to these patients in cancer that really truly extended their lives and gave them a hope and a safety net. But baked into the cost is not just the research and development. The FDA required Johnson & Johnson, they have to follow patients on that drug for 18 years. Think about that. You have to have a team, a huge team, at a manufacturer following patients on that drug or who are on the drug and then discontinue the drug for 18 years. Those are the type of things that are driving up drug costs. But at the end of the day, our system needs to change. There needs to be more transparency. There needs to be more accountability. Profits should not be put ahead of patients. Insurers and PBMs that are publicly traded, and hospitals for that matter, Their fiduciary duty is to the shareholders and not to the patients. There are a lot of things that have to change. I didn't give you a bunch of solutions. I know it just probably raised more questions, but I just wanted to give you some insights as to what's going on, and we need to challenge our media and our legislators on fixing it. And I hope that you enjoyed all the crazy birds here in North Carolina on this morning that is gorgeous. And I hope that you will subscribe to the podcast, go to the YouTube channel, check it out. And until next week, have a great day. Be safe. Take care.